They thought she was just another woman walking her dog through the woods. That was their first mistake. The trail that cut through Algonquin's eastern edge wasn't exactly a secret, but it wasn't a tourist path either. Ellie Voss knew every route, every rock, every bend in that 6-kilometer loop the way she knew the bones in her own hands. She'd been running it since she was 19, back when she was still figuring out what to do with a body that had been trained for war, and a mind that hadn't quite caught up with the fact that the war was over. That was 7 years ago. Now she walked it, slow, more deliberate, partly because of the knee, the right one, which still ached in October when the temperature dropped below 8, and partly because of Boone. Boone wasn't a pet. Anyone who spent more than 30 seconds around him understood that instinctively, even if they couldn't articulate why. He was a Belgian Malinois, 72 pounds of compact muscle and absolute focus, with a scar along his left flank from a night in northern Manitoba that neither of them talked about anymore. He didn't pull at the leash. He didn't chase squirrels. He walked beside Ellie with the easy, watchful attention of a partner who understood that off-duty didn't mean off. It was a Tuesday morning in late October. The maples had already dropped most of their leaves, and the ones left were the color of dried blood against a sky that couldn't decide between gray and white. Ellie's breath fogged in front of her. She had her hands in the front pocket of her olive-green hoodie, the one with the fraying cuffs she kept meaning to replace, and her earbuds were in. But the volume was low enough that she could hear the crunch of gravel under her boots. Boone heard them first. His ears came forward, not the full alert posture. That was something different, something she'd learned to read over 4 years of working together, but a particular kind of attention that meant people ahead, uncertain intent. His stride didn't change. He didn't make a sound. But Ellie felt the shift in him the way you feel a change in wind pressure before the storm actually arrives. She pulled out her left earbud and kept walking. The 3 men were parked at the trail junction where the forest road met the gravel loop. An old F-250 rust along the wheel wells Ontario plates. 2 of them were leaning against the truck. The third was standing in the middle of the path. Ellie recognized the formation without thinking about it. 1 to block, 2 to flank. Old instinct, maybe not conscious, but there it was. She kept her pace even, unhurried. The one in the middle was big. Broad shoulders, maybe 6'2", wearing a canvas jacket the color of mud. He had the look of a man who was used to taking up space and having people adjust around him. He didn't move as she approached. "Trail's closed," he said. Ellie stopped about 4 meters back. Boone sat without being asked, pressed lightly against her left leg. "Doesn't look closed," she said. The man shrugged like he found her mildly amusing. "Well, it is now." The 2 by the truck exchanged a look. One of them, younger, wiry, with a grey toque pulled low, laughed under his breath. The other one, heavier, with a beard that was less groomed than neglected, just watched. Ellie glanced at the truck, then back at the man in front of her. "I'm just walking my dog," she said. Calm, even, the same tone she'd used 100 times before, in places where the wrong word at the wrong moment cost more than anyone wanted to pay. "Then turn around and walk him somewhere else." She didn't move right away. She was looking at the truck bed, at the tarp that was pulled over something, tied down, with bungee cords that were doing a poor job of it. One corner had lifted in the wind, and she could see the edge of a plastic crate, the kind used for temperature-sensitive cargo. She filed that away. "Last chance, sweetheart," the big man said, and something in his voice shifted, just slightly, just enough. The amusement was gone. "I'm going to walk through," Ellie said, "and I'm going to suggest you move." He blinked, like he genuinely hadn't expected that. Then he looked at Boone, and something ugly crossed his face. "That dog bites. I'm going to put it down myself." Everything changed. Not on the outside. Ellie didn't move, didn't flinch, didn't make a sound, but something in her went very, very still. The kind of still that comes after years of learning that panic is a liability and anger, when properly channeled, is just fuel. Boone felt it. He didn't growl. He turned his head slightly and looked up at her, waiting. She looked at the man in front of her for a long moment. "That dog," she said quietly, "has more operational hours than you've had hot meals. He's done 2 rotations in the north and 1 in Afghanistan. He's faster than you, stronger than you, and he will do exactly what I tell him to do, when I tell him to do it." She paused. "So, I'm going to say this once. Move away from the trail. Go back to your truck. Drive away." The big man stared at her. Then he took a step forward. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't reach for anything. She just looked at him with the particular kind of patience that has nothing to do with passivity. "Last warning," she said. He swung. It was a wide, telegraphed hook, the kind that worked in bar fights against people who froze. Ellie wasn't people who froze. She slipped it, rotated, and used his momentum to bring his arm up behind his back, in a motion that was so efficient it almost looked gentle. He went down onto one knee with a sound like air leaving a punctured tire. She heard the other 2 moving. Boone. Fass. The wiry one in the toque had 3 steps of head start, and it still wasn't enough. Boone closed the distance like water flowing downhill. No wasted motion. No hesitation, and took him to the ground with a controlled bite on the forearm, exactly where he'd been trained to. The man yelled. Boone held. The third one, the bearded one, pulled something from behind his jacket, a tactical folding knife which told Ellie he'd had some training, or at least thought he had. He came in fast and low. She let go of the first man, who sprawled forward and stayed down, and shifted her weight. The knife passed close enough that she felt the air move beside her ribs. She caught his wrist on the follow-through, twisted, and drove his elbow into a direction elbows weren't designed to travel. The knife hit the gravel. He didn't pick it up again. 12 seconds, maybe 15. All 3 of them were on the ground. The only sounds were ragged breathing, a few choice words from the wiry one, who was still very much aware of Boone's grip on his arm, and the wind moving through what was left of the maple leaves overhead. "Lass." Boone released and returned to Ellie's side immediately, sitting with the same quiet attention as before, like nothing particularly notable had happened. Ellie straightened. She looked at the 3 men on the ground with the same expression she'd worn throughout. Not satisfied, not angry, just present. She pulled her phone from her pocket and dialed. It rang twice. "Constable Bergeron," said the voice on the other end. "It's Voss. I'm on the East Trail access, Algonquin junction with Forest Road 12. I've got 3 men down and a vehicle I think you're going to want to look at." A pause. "Are you okay?" "I'm fine." She glanced at Boone, who was calmly watching the man with the knife, who hadn't moved. "Boone's fine. Stay put. I'm sending units." She hung up and sat down on a flat rock beside the trail, close enough to keep an eye on all 3 of them. Boone pressed against her knee, warm and solid. She took out her other earbud, coiling the cord around her thumb. The big man, the one who'd thrown the first punch, was sitting up now, cradling his arm, looking at her like she was something he couldn't quite account for. His face had gone through several shades of color and settled on a dull, uncertain red. "Who are you?" he asked. Ellie looked at him for a moment without answering. "I was just walking my dog," she said. The OPP cruisers arrived 11 minutes later. 2 of them, lights on, no sirens. Constable Bergeron came in the second car, and she climbed out already pulling on gloves, which told Ellie she'd already gotten some kind of preliminary read on the situation. Bergeron was mid-30s, short brown hair, the careful eyes of someone who'd learned not to assume. She took in the scene without visible reaction. 3 men, various states of distress, 1 woman sitting on a rock with a dog, and walked directly to Ellie. "Tell me," she said. Ellie told her. Clean, sequential, no editorializing. Bergeron listened without interrupting. When Ellie got to the part about the tarp in the truck bed, Bergeron's expression shifted. "You saw a crate," she repeated. "Temperature-controlled, sealed, bungee cord securing, sloppy. 1 corner exposed." Ellie paused. "I worked K9 forensics support for 4 years out of Petawawa. I know what equipment cases look like." Bergeron was already walking toward the truck. The tarp came off to reveal 3 plastic crates, hard-sided, padlocked. Each one had a biohazard sticker on the outside that someone had tried to peel off, leaving behind a ghost of adhesive and the unmistakable outline of the warning symbol. The crates were connected to a small battery pack running a cooling unit. Bergeron stepped back and reached for her radio. "Dispatch, this is Bergeron at Forest Road 12 Junction, Algonquin East Access. I need CBRN notification and a supervisory officer at my location. Possible biosecurity incident." The 3 men who had been sitting against the truck in zip ties went very quiet. Ellie watched them. The big one, she'd learned his name, was Warren Mulcahy from Sudbury, with 2 prior charges for aggravated assault, was no longer looking at her with contempt. He was looking at the ground with the careful stillness of a man calculating how much trouble he was in and coming up with a number he didn't like. The wiry one, whose name turned out to be Joel Peckett, was the one who'd threatened Boone. He was holding a field dressing against his forearm. The responding officer had applied it without ceremony, and avoiding eye contact with everyone. The third one, Gordon Stiles, had stopped talking entirely after the first officer had read him his rights. He had the look of someone who had decided that silence was the only thing left he could control. She'd seen that look before, in different places, on different faces. It usually meant the situation was bigger than it appeared. Bergeron came back to where Ellie was standing. "Ciberon is 40 minutes out," she said. "They want the area contained." She paused. "I'm going to need a full statement." "I know. The 3 of them. We're running them now. The one with the knife has a record in Quebec." Bergeron glanced over at the truck. "That cargo. Do you have any idea?" "I don't know what's in the crates," Ellie said honestly. "But the cooling unit is medical grade, and that biohazard marking wasn't put there by a hospital." Bergeron nodded slowly. She had the manner of someone assembling a picture from pieces that weren't adding up to anything comfortable. "You said you worked out of Petawawa, 4 years. K9 unit, forensics support. Before that, JTF2 assets, northern rotation." Bergeron looked at her with something that wasn't quite surprise. "And now you're walking trails. And now I'm walking trails," Ellie agreed. Boone, who had been sitting patiently through all of this, leaned his head lightly against Ellie's thigh. She put her hand on his neck without looking down. The 40 minutes became 2 hours. The CBRN team arrived in an unmarked van, followed by 2 vehicles that had no markings at all, which Ellie recognized as a particular kind of federal vehicle before anyone from them said a word. One of the men who climbed out of the second black SUV was wearing a jacket that said CFEA in block letters, and he went directly to the truck with the kind of urgent efficiency that meant he already knew what he was looking at. The other one came to Ellie. He was in his 5th unit at the temples with the kind of face that had spent years learning to be unreadable. He introduced himself as Agent Fortier without specifying which agency the title applied to. "Mrs. Voss," he said. "Agent." He looked at her for a moment, then almost imperceptibly he relaxed. "You used to work with Wade Kowalski," he said. It wasn't a question. "I did," she said. "He speaks highly of you." "He speaks highly of very few people," she said. "So that's either a good sign or he was feeling charitable." Something close to a smile moved across Fortier's face and disappeared. He turned to look at the crates, which were now being documented by the CBRN team with the careful, methodical attention of people who weren't allowed to make mistakes. "Those crates," he said, "contain vials of a modified avian pathogen. Our agency has been tracking a distribution network operating out of 3 provinces for approximately 8 months. This truck," he paused, "was the link we've been trying to establish between a lab in Montreal and a contact in northern Ontario." Ellie was quiet. "We had surveillance on this road. 2 of our assets were delayed this morning." He looked at her sideways. "And then we picked up Constable Bergeron's CBRN notification, and someone on our team ran the location. And here you are," Ellie said. "And here I am." He paused. You apprehended 3 individuals, prevented a cargo transfer, and preserved chain of custody on material evidence. Without knowing any of that, I was walking my dog, she said. So I've been told. He looked at Boone. Boone looked back at him with a calm, level gaze that seemed to unsettle him slightly, the way it often unsettled people who weren't used to being assessed by animals. He's a Malinois. Belgian. Yes, former service animal. Former and current, she said. He never really stopped working. Neither of us did. Fortier was quiet for a moment. The CFEA officer called something over to him in French and he held up a hand. 1 minute without looking away from Ellie. Mrs. Voss, he said, I'd like to have a more formal conversation with you. Not today and not here. He reached into his jacket and produced a card, plain white, just a number. When you're ready. She took it, looked at it, put it in her back pocket. I have one question first, she said. Go ahead. The pathogen. Was it viable? Fortier's expression told her what she needed to know before he said it. Yes, he said. It was. She nodded once. She didn't ask anything else. It was past noon by the time she was cleared to leave. Bergeron walked her to the trailhead and said she'd be in touch for the formal statement, and Ellie said she'd come to the detachment in the morning. And that was that. No drama, no ceremony, just the clean, quiet end of a bureaucratic process, and the trail still there in front of her, same as it had been 4 hours ago. She and Boone walked back through the woods. The light had changed. Midday now, thinner and more direct, finding its way through the bare branches in narrow lines. Her breath still fogged, the knee still ached. A chickadee moved through the underbrush to her left, and Boone tracked it with his eyes, without breaking stride, one small luxury allowed. She thought about the crates, the cooling unit, the number on the card in her back pocket. She thought about how 3 men had looked at her and seen nothing to worry about. She thought about Boone, who had taken a bullet for this country, and walked beside her now without ceremony, without acknowledgement, without needing any of it. He'd known something was wrong before she did. He always did. That was the thing about working with a dog who had been trained the way Boone had. They read the world differently, with senses and instincts that went underneath language, underneath performance, to something older and more reliable. He hadn't barked when the man threatened him. He hadn't reacted. He had looked at Ellie and waited. That kind of trust, she thought, was not built. It was earned, slowly, over time and shared difficulty, and it went both directions. She reached down and scratched behind his ear. He leaned into it briefly, then straightened, because there was still trail to cover, and he took his responsibilities seriously. She smiled, almost to herself. She'd call Fortier in 3 days, not 2, 3, long enough that he'd understand she wasn't eager, which she wasn't, but not so long that he'd think she wasn't interested, which she was. The network he'd described, 3 provinces, 8 months of surveillance, a Montreal lab, that was something. Whatever they needed from her, whatever use they thought she and Boone might be, she wanted to hear it. She also wanted to make sure it was the right ask, for the right reason. She'd learned that lesson the hard way, once, in a way she didn't like to think about on mornings when the trail was quiet and the only sound was gravel under her boots. The trailhead parking lot came into view. Her truck was the only vehicle left, her old Ram, silver, with a dent in the rear panel she kept forgetting to get fixed. Boone jumped in on his side before she had the door fully open, turned twice, and settled into his spot with the pragmatic efficiency of a creature who understood that rest was tactical. She sat in the driver's seat for a moment without starting the engine. The card was still in her back pocket. The ache was still in her knee. The October sky was still undecided about what color it wanted to be. She started the truck. "Good work today," she said. Boone's tail moved once against the seat. He didn't look up. She pulled out of the lot and onto the road, and the forest closed behind them in the mirror, and by the time they reached the highway, the trail junction, the tarp, the crates, and the 3 men who had assumed they were dealing with someone ordinary were already 20 kilometers behind them. She drove with one hand on the wheel and the other resting on the console where Boone could reach it if he chose to, which he did after a moment, settling his chin on her forearm, with the comfortable weight of something earned. The ghost and her wolf, back on the road where they belonged.